Our next speaker is Peter Diamandis. He's founder of International Space University, another NSS director, and currently is chairman of the X Prize Foundation, of which he's going to talk about right now. Peter?
Thank you. Thanks, folks. I'm sorry that we're running a little bit over. I hope to make this as interesting as possible for you, and I hope that this will work as well. Okay. How many? No, leave the lights up while I start. How many folks here have heard about the X Prize competition? Please raise your hand. Okay, great. Well, some PR is working. The X Prize is really fundamentally about getting us into space. That is what it's all about. Everything we're hearing about here is wonderful. The future of humanity, making money. When it comes down to it, my motivation behind the X Prize is getting myself into space and getting my friends up there and changing this from a third-hand experience to a first-hand experience, because that will change everything. Fundamentally, we've been all waiting 30 years. We've been promised over and over again. The question is, how are we going to go? And the issue is not we want to go. The issue is not, is the money there? The issue is not, is it fun? It's that the vehicles to carry us there don't exist right now. Unless, of course, you happen to be one of a few hundred very lucky government employees who have worked very hard all their lives to go and were selected. But if you're not, the vehicles to take you and me up there just don't exist yet. We're using a technique that was inborn in us about, a couple of 100 million, close to 1 billion years ago, called competitive spirit. We exist here as the highest form of evolution on this planet because we've learned how to compete successfully. And we want to build that competition back in. We've been talking about cooperation in space for a decade. Hell with that, I want competition in space. That works now. Now, we're not using something new. The fact of the matter, today's $250 billion aviation industry is alive and well because of prizes. And with that, I want to read a little vignette from the turn of the century, about 85 years ago, to give you a sense and a flavor of what was going on back then. It's called Coast to Coast. The early days of aviation were filled with danger, feats of extraordinary courage, and underlying determination. European newspapers had offered huge cash prizes for the fleets flying across the English Channel. And not to be outdone, the American tycoon William Randolph Hearst began to offer aviation prizes. In part, he did this to try and increase circulation. Pilots such as Perry and Rogers exemplified the bold aviation spirit that undertook to take on these prizes. And here's the story of Rogers, who flew the Vin-Fizz. Rogers was a 6'4" football player, an avid motorcycle and yachtsman, great-grandson of Commodore Perry, who was a naval hero of that time. And in 1911, Rogers decided to go after the Hearst Prize, which was a $50,000 prize, worth a couple $1 million today, for the first coast-to-coast flight, west coast to east or east to west, didn't matter. Though if you were smart about which way the winds were going, you'd probably go east to west. And it had to be done within 30 days. It didn't bother Rogers that he was nearly deaf as a result of childhood scarlet fever, nor that he only had 60 hours of flight time total. Rogers had learned to fly the year before in the Wright Brothers School in Dayton, Ohio, and had soloed in only 90 minutes. That's 90 minutes. Setting a new record for that school, by the way. 2 months after Rogers got his license, he went after and won an $11,000 prize for durability given at the Chicago Air Meet, logging 27 hours in the air. As Rogers stated, I, quote, looked over the prize list, picked the biggest one, and determined to bend all my energies towards winning it, and did. And so the flamboyant Chicagoman, cigar-chomping 32-year-old Rogers set out to find the biggest prize again. This was a $50,000 Hearst Prize. Who's trying to do so? Okay. And he went after Ogden Amore for sponsorship, because sponsorship back then was the way to get your money. And Ogden Amore decided to give him $5 per mile that he flew. In return, he was to advertise the Vin Fizz, a drink of that time, I guess the Pepsi-Cola equivalent soft drink. The Wright brothers decided to build him a specialized EX biplane, especially for Rogers, especially for this huge guy. And it was a bigger version of the Model B, equipped with skids and wheels at a top speed of 60 miles an hour. He started across the U.S. Following his airplane was a Pullman car, a day coach for Rogers' wife and mom, a mechanic specialty hangar car carrying $4,000 in spare parts and gasoline, and a spatial racing car to get to him very quickly in case he crashed. No one accepted Hearst's prize challenge until the month before, at which point two novice pilots decided to go after it as well. One of them, Robert Fowler, set off eastward from San Francisco, but gave up after his radiator started boiling while attempting to fly the Donner Pass. An ex-jockey was convinced to turn back, never made it out of New York State, moving westward. But on the 17th of September in 1911, Rogers climbed into the Vin Fizz flyer and set out to make history. The layers of sweaters that he wore in that unconditioned open cockpit told of the icy cold he was going to get as he flew over the mountains. Rogers took off in a racetrack near Sheepshead Bay, New York, proceeded to follow the white canvases laid out to help track him across the mountain range there, and made his first 84 miles to Middleton, New York without any problems. In fact, he was boasting on landing, "I didn't even knock the ashes off my cigar." Unfortunately, that landing was the easiest of all of them. The next day, Rogers clipped the tree on takeoff and landed upside down in a chicken coop with a cigar still clenched in his teeth. The plane was quickly rebuilt, but on the next leg, Rogers broke a skid near an ill-fated potato field landing after a spark plug had popped out of the cylinder head. Still, the next day, Rogers took a wrong turn at the railroad junction and went south to Pennsylvania. There, he almost lost his airplane to souvenir hunters who were actually trying to saw off parts of the airplane when he hit the ground. Taking off again, Rogers found himself flying with one hand holding this loose spark plug and the other one on the wheel. The airplane was again smashed, and Rogers snagged a barbed wire fence on takeoff from Allegheny Indian Reservation. Over that Indiana area, he encountered a vast thunderstorm and later stated, "The Earth had disappeared. I might be 1,000,000 miles up in space or 100 feet off the Earth. I had no idea." His next crash occurred while avoiding a crowd of zealot spectators at Chicago, with only 2 days left in the Hearst competition, where Rogers only 1/3 across the U.S. He would not make the the prize deadline, but his initial prize incentive was enough to keep him going. He convinced his sponsors at Vin Fizz to keep that $5 a mile going so he can get to the Pacific Ocean, which was his want. Prize or no prize, that's where I'm bound. And if canvas, steel, and wire, together with little brawn, tendon, and brain, stick with me, I might get there, he said. Rogers headed south towards Texas to avoid the perils of the Rocky Mountains, only again have his airplane totaled by a tree stump on takeoff. The journey became no easier in California, where at a cruising altitude of 4,000 feet, the cylinder blew out, tearing the engine apart and driving steel shards into Rogers' arm. The plane went into a dive, but Rogers pulled out safely and landed in Imperial Junction, where he was repaired, both himself and his airplane. Vin Fizz limped to Pasadena 19 days too late to receive the Hearst Prize, but nonetheless greeted by a cheering crowd of 10,000 Californians. However, Rogers wasn't satisfied on this goal. He wanted to reach the Pacific Ocean. So he took off the next week to fly his final 20 miles. Just 8 miles later, the newly reconditioned engine failed again, and upon crashing, Rogers sustained internal injuries and a broken spine. Shortly after regaining consciousness, Rogers lit a cigar and said, "I'm going for the ocean. Can't stop me here." 1 month later, the irrepressible Rogers left the hospital, hobbled to the rebuilt airplane, strapped in his crutches and wings, and flew onto the sands of Long Beach. By the way, at this point, The airplane, he said, was his original airplane, had left of the original airplane the rudder and the oil and drip pan. The rest has been totally rebuilt. At the ocean, 50,000 cheering Californians gleefully rolled the airplane into the Pacific coast. Rogers had made 69 stops in all, 23 in Texas alone. Big state, really big state. 19 crashes, had logged 82 hours in the air to cover the 3,220-mile journey. He had crossed America coast to coast in 49 days. And on his epitaph it wrote, "I endure and I conquer." Now, that was one of 100 equivalent aviation stories of people who literally put their lives and other people's lives on the line to try and win hundreds. I'm just trying to get hold of me here. To really push the edge. I mean, you have to imagine the mentality of these people who are saying, I'm going to go for this prize no matter what it takes. And with that, I and others believe that prizes are a great mechanism for getting us into space as well, because they focus the human spirit, they focus human finances towards a specific goal. And the vision of the X Prize is as follows. Some people in life just don't have vision. and it's typically the establishment. And not to say anything wrong about them, but the establishment is built around keeping the status quo, the status quo. And then, entrepreneurs come along and they change the way people think about life. And those entrepreneurs are folks here in this room and the 15 now teams going after the X Prize. The world doesn't change at a constant rate, it changes overnight, suddenly. And we're about making those changes. ABC is usually overrun by AB, X, Y, and Z. The X Prize is about opening the frontier of space to the general public. 35 years after the Wright brothers flew, we had transcontinental travel on the verge of transoceanic. We're just after that. But 35 years after Gagarin flew, we are now even further away from buying a ticket to go into space than we were 20 years ago. Think about it. The heights of the Apollo program, we thought we were next. It was just a matter of time. We were promised that. Well, we believed it. And we aren't getting close. The question is why. Again, the technology exists. It's existed for a decade. We all know it. The markets exist. And it's a matter of trying to get a catalyst to the golden age of spaceflight, and that's what we believe the X Prize is about. What are the rules of the X Prize? It is a competition for a $10 million purse, which we're in the process of raising. I'll discuss that in a little bit. It has to be privately financed and privately built. We don't want government agencies going after this prize. We don't want government institutions going after it. We want it to be a commercial result. You have to be able to carry 3 people, or at least 1 person and the equivalent weight of 2 other individuals, to an altitude of 100 kilometers.
Does that weight and volume include the associated life support equipment?
Life support is up to the player. I mean, all we care about is that you can carry. It's a short trip. We're talking about 20 minutes. You can almost hold your breath for that. 62 miles, 100 kilometers. That's above most people's expectation or definition of what space is about. But it's easy enough to get to. We're talking about Mach 4 or 5. We're not talking about orbital velocities here. And most importantly for me, you have to land safely, and you have to be able to refly again within 2 weeks. That makes this thing not a stunt. It makes it, in fact, something which will have media attention, because when Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic, it was 3 days of front-page news.
And the second flight with the same vehicle within a week?
You have to reuse. Well, let's get to the next one. The ship must be reusable. There's a definition that you can replace 10% of the dry mass. So if you want to replace a nozzle or that is up to you. We want a reusable ship. And it doesn't mean the oil pan and the rudder is the same as the Each team must comply with all governing laws associated with their country. So if you're out of Russia, it's Russian laws. If you're out of the United States, it's U.S. laws, which, by the way, I think will be a major advantage to moving the U.S. regulatory agencies along. I love the headlines, leading spaceship designer forced to launch out of Mexico because U.S. regulations didn't work, or Russians beat America again. Our Rules Committee right now, Henry Vanderbilt from Space Access Society, Max Hunter, many of you know, Colonel Pete Warden of DCX and Clementine fame, and Greg Marinac, who's used to be the head of the Space Studies Institute, is now our Chief Operating Officer. Sorry about that. What got this started was I had a chance to read a book by Charles Lindbergh called Spirit of St. Louis. And in that, he spoke about one prize, the Ortega Prize. It was a $25,000 prize, started in 1919, won by Lindbergh in 1927, and 9 teams went after that prize. 9 teams cumulatively spent $400,000 to win a $25,000 prize. 16 times the prize amount. Imagine that kind of economic return on today's investment in space. Usually it's the flip of that with government contracts. Lindbergh was an underdog. He was seen as the least likely to win this when he flew in 1927. I'm going to skip through this quite quickly. We asked a couple of key questions, which I'll answer. Is it technically feasible? Will qualified teams able to compete? Will the communities endorse this? Can we handle regulatory and liability factors? And when will it be won? And importantly, will the money be there? The $10 million purse is not in place as of yet. We're working with the St. Louis community to win that, and to actually raise those funds. St. Louis has put together about $1.25 million so far to kick off this and to get the competition going. Here's some of our endorsers in St. Louis. We're based at the St. Louis Science Center. The Merits Corporation, which is a $3 billion corporation in St. Louis, is working with us to pull together that $10 million. We're organizing the X Prize as really an America's Cup or an Olympic level competition, where in fact there will be major corporate sponsors backing the competition. We'll have their logos on the ships, on the gantries, on the helmets and suits being worn, with the intent of making this one of the most visible events around the world, as teams are launching out of Mexico, Russia, California, and Australia, which is probably one of the best places to hold the competition. But anyway, we'll have CNN cameras there with the intent that people realize that once these vehicles fly and succeed, they're next. We have one winner. We'll have 20 teams as runners-up. Aren't going to stop there. They're going to want to take their vehicles, commercialize them, and start barnstorming suborbital flights around the world. 35 teams have asked for information. 15 teams have registered. We expect another 20 or so, or more than 20 in the before the end of the year. Here are the first 4 teams to register. Bert Rattan with #1 Scout Composites, Gary Hudson at HMX, Bob Zubrin at Pioneer Rocket, Pac Astro. I know Harry Dace is here with I think the 5th team register. We've had endorsement. Dan Golden was out there to kick us off at St. Louis at our press conference. Buzz Aldrin has co-chaired our events. Arthur Clark has really been tremendous. And the Lindbergh family has been very supportive. 2 of the Lindbergh grandsons are on our board of trustees and are supporting this effort. We've also gotten endorsement from all the key organizations. The Fédération Aéronautique Internationale will be helping to judge this competition. They judge Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic. The Experimental Aircraft Association, the Association of Space Explorers unanimously endorsed it. So we really have been lucky, as well as the National Space Society, of course, lucky to get major aviation and space organizations united on this effort, which is our key. We want to make sure this competition is done well, succeeds, and represents your interests. Basically, as to when this will be won, I do expect a winner in 2000 or 2001, which will be a lot of fun. My final slide is to note a couple of other near-term events. Ed Crawley at MIT, who's now chairman of the department, has taken on the X Prize as their senior aero and astro design project for next year, which is neat. The U.S. Air Force Academy has taken it on as well, and we're now launching a effort to get about a dozen universities around the world to take on the X Prize as the 97-98 academic year design competition. With the runoff will take place at St. Louis and at MIT in May of '98. So we hope to have start brainwashing the young aerospace engineers. This, by the way, is our trophy. It's a 150-pound, 5-foot bronze, beautiful trophy. We're going to have a 30 by 60 foot tent in Oshkosh. Any of you who are there at the air show are welcome to come by. We'll have our gala dinner or event September 27th in St. Louis. Tom Clance will be our keynote speaker, and we'll have hopefully all 15 teams there to compete for it. And finally, we've just kicked off a senior associate program. Folks have been asking how they can get involved and support the X Prize. Those of you who are interested in our senior associate program to get further involved, please see me afterwards. I've got some materials for you. And with that, we're only 11 minutes late for lunch. So thank you for your time.
Do I have any questions for any of our speakers? Lunch, then. Oh, wait, lunch.
Just one question. I want the ignorance about the regulatory environment. It sounds like that because of the Space Treaty of '67, that this is going to be very difficult to do if for American-based companies and the American government doesn't really change the regulatory environment.
We are working with DOT. I mean, the head, Guy Gardner, who now is essentially de facto head of the FAA, is fully supportive, as is Pat.
Emissions export laws.
Agreed. And we're working with that to make sure that the teams will compete. That's one of our objectives, to make sure a regulatory regime does not interfere with what we're doing.
Regulators, bureaucrats, what is their initial response to this?
Wonderful. We're gonna allow it. We're gonna make it happen. Yes.
Is there a loophole somewhere so that the Air Force Academy is not considered government?
Well, they're only doing a design project. As long as the government officials can join a team, they just can't get money from the government.